Many years ago, in the town of Owo in Ogun State, where the king ruled over 30 smaller towns whose people regularly came to pay tribute and honor to the royal family, there lived a young prince named Adeola. Prince Adeola Adewale, the future king of Owo land, was known throughout the land for his kindness and wisdom, even from a young age. He was the only son of Oba Adewale, the king, and Queen Shewa, the queen of Owo land. Although Adeola was a prince, he didn't behave like most royals. He loved to explore the village, talk to the people, and learn about their lives. Often, he would visit the market, where he watched the hustle and bustle of traders and buyers. One day, while wandering through the market, Adeola's eyes fell on a young girl named Bisola. She was a commoner, but her smile was warm, and her kindness radiated as she greeted everyone who passed by. Adeola couldn't help but notice her, and before long he found himself drawn to her more and more. One afternoon, Adeola noticed Bisola struggling to carry a heavy basket of yams. Without thinking twice, he rushed over to help her. "Here, let me help you with that," Adeola offered, taking the basket from her hands. Bisola looked up, surprised to see the prince. "Oh, thank you, my prince," she said, bowing slightly, her cheeks turning pink. "Please call me Adeola," the prince replied with a smile. "No need to be so formal." She smiled back shyly. "Thank you, Prince Adeola." From that day on, Adeola and Bisola began to meet more often. At first, their conversations were brief, but soon they started spending time together. Most times they would sit on the riverbank, talking about their dreams and hopes. As time passed, their feelings for each other grew deeper, and Adeola prayed that their love would be accepted by his family. His parents, Oba Adewale and Queen Shewa, would never allow him to marry a commoner. Still, Adeola couldn't help how he felt. Why can't things be different? Adeola sighed one evening by the river. "What do you mean?" Bisola asked, looking at him. "I wish I didn't have the weight of being a prince, that I wish we can go somewhere else and start a family together, Bisola. Like normal people," Adeola said, his voice filled with sadness. She placed a gentle hand on his. "I understand, but you are a prince. You have duties, responsibilities, you have royal blood in you. You are not like normal people. You have to understand that you are special and your people need you." Despite knowing the challenges ahead, they continued to see each other. Their love was strong, and they promised each other they would find a way to make it work. However, soon after, Bisola discovered she was pregnant. When Adeola broke the news to his parents, their reaction was swift and harsh. "You cannot marry her," Oba Adewale roared. His voice echoed through the palace. "But I love her," Adeola pleaded, his heart heavy. "Love is not enough," the king thundered. "You are a prince. You must marry someone of royal blood." Queen Shewa, though gentler in her approach, was no less firm. "Adeola, I understand your heart, but your duty to your people must come first. You cannot marry Bisola." Tears welled up in Adeola's eyes. "But what about our child? What about our family?" he asked, his voice breaking. "We will take care of the child," Queen Shewa said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But Bisola cannot be your wife." Heartbroken, Adeola and Bisola had no choice but to let go of their dream of starting a family together and getting married. Bisola gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Fola, but soon after, Bisola fell gravely ill. Despite the efforts of healers, she passed away shortly after childbirth. Adeola was devastated. His love was gone, and now he had to face the reality of raising his daughter without her mother. Though his heart was shattered, he knew he had to be strong for his little girl. Queen Shewa, seeing Adeola's pain, stepped in to raise Fola, her granddaughter. She cared for the child with all her heart and made sure that Fola grew up knowing about her mother's kindness and strength. And so life in Owo went on. Though Adeola's heart never fully healed, he found peace in watching his daughter grow into a beautiful and strong young girl, just like her mother. Years passed and life in Owo continued. However, one day tragedy struck the royal family. Oba Adewale and Queen Shewa fell ill after a feast. No one could explain how it happened, but it was said to be from food poisoning. Despite the efforts of the royal doctors, the beloved king and queen passed away. The entire village of Owo was thrown into deep mourning. For weeks, the sound of weeping filled the air as the people grieved for their rulers. Adeola, now in his early 30s, heartbroken by the loss of his parents, had to put his own pain aside. He was no longer just the prince. He was now Oba Adeola Adewale, the new king of Owo land. On the day of his coronation, the village gathered in the palace courtyard. The air was thick with a mixture of sorrow for the lost king and queen, and excitement for the new reign of Oba Adeola. Fola, now 10 years old, stood beside her father, her small hand holding his tightly. She was proud of her father but also scared of the changes that were about to happen. "Are you ready, Bami?" she asked softly, looking up at him with wide eyes. Adeola smiled down at her, though his heart was heavy. "I must be ready, my dear. It is my duty now." As Adeola stepped forward to take his place on the royal throne, the village elders stood by, watching closely. The chief elder, Baba Olanii, approached him with the royal staff, a symbol of power and leadership in Owo land. "Kabisi Oba Adeola Adole, may your reign be long and prosperous," Baba Olanii said in a deep voice, bowing as he handed over the staff. "Thank you, Baba Olanii," Adeola replied, his voice strong, though inside he felt the weight of his new responsibility. The crowd erupted in cheers, shouting praises to their new king. "Long live the king! Long live Oba Adeola!" As the cheering continued, Adeola glanced at Fola, who smiled proudly at him. Yet deep down, Adeola felt a tug in his heart. He wished Bisola could be there to see him, to see how far he had come. But she was gone, and all he had was the memory of their love. Later that evening, after the coronation ceremony, Adeola was presented with his new wife, Queen Tulu. She was a woman of royal blood, chosen by the elders to be a perfect match for the new king. Queen Tulu had been groomed her entire life to become a queen. She carried herself with grace and dignity, and many believed she would bring honor to the throne. As Queen Tulu approached Adeola, she bowed respectfully. "High King," she said softly, her voice calm and elegant. "It is an honor to stand by your side." Adeola nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. "Thank you, Queen Tulu. I hope you find your place here in Owo land." Tulu smiled politely, but she could sense that Adeola's heart was not fully with her. She had heard whispers about Bisola, the commoner girl who had captured the prince's heart many years ago, but she did not mention it. The days following the coronation were filled with royal duties. Adeola spent his time meeting with the village elders, settling disputes, and making decisions for the good of the people. Queen Tulu, on the other hand, took her role seriously, ensuring the palace was run smoothly and the people respected their new queen. However, in quiet moments when Adeola was alone, he often found himself thinking of Bisola. He remembered their secret meetings by the river, her laughter and her kindness. Though he had accepted Queen Tulu as his wife, a part of him still ached for the love he had lost. One evening, as Adeola sat in his private chambers, Fola entered the room. She sat next to him and hugged him tightly. "Bami," she whispered, "I miss Grandma and Grandpa." Adeola stroked her hair gently. "I miss them every day too, my dear." "And your mother too," Adeola sighed, his heart heavy. "She was a special woman just like you." Fola smiled at her father, her eyes twinkling. "I want to be just like her when I grow up." Adeola kissed the top of her head. "You already are, my little princess." Though life had changed for Adeola, he found comfort in his daughter. Fola was the light in his life, a reminder of the love he once shared with her mother. And though he had accepted his role as king and taken Queen Tulu as his wife, he knew that part of his heart would always belong to Bisola. Queen Tulu quickly noticed the special bond between Adeola and his daughter Fola. It was impossible to ignore the way Adeola's face lit up every time Fola entered the room. The little girl brought him joy, especially when he was weighed down by the responsibilities of being king. Fola was everything to him, a bright reminder of his love for Bisola, the woman he had lost but never forgotten. Tulu would watch them from a distance, her lips tight with jealousy. She felt like an outsider in her own palace. No matter how hard she tried to win Adeola's affection, his heart always seemed to belong elsewhere, especially to Fola. Why does he love her so much? Tulu muttered to herself one evening as she watched them laugh together in the courtyard. She is just a child. The queen's jealousy only grew worse with time. She told herself that it was just because Adeola hadn't yet warmed up to her. After all, she was new to the palace, and being a queen came with many adjustments, but she couldn't say the same 3 years later as her jealousy turned to bitter frustration. Deep down, Tulu knew the real reason for her bitterness. She doesn't have a child. She had tried, but nothing happened. The royal doctors had even examined her, only to tell her that she will have a child when the time is right. She had been raised to be a queen, to give the king an heir. But now, with no children of her own, she felt useless. And worse, it seemed like Adeola didn't care. He already had Fola, his precious daughter, and that was enough for him. "He doesn't even need me," she whispered bitterly, pacing in her chambers. "He has Fola. She is the only thing that matters to him." Day by day, her anger grew. Every smile that Adeola gave Fola felt like a slap to Tolu's face. She began to see the little girl as a threat to her position as queen. The more Fola reminded Adeola of Bisola, the more Tolu's hatred for the child grew. "She must go," Tolu decided one night as she sat alone in her room. "If I am to secure my place as queen and give Adeola a true heir, I cannot let her stay." Tolu began to devise plans to get rid of Fola. At first, her plans were subtle. She would send Fola on long errands, hoping that the child would wander off and get lost in the forest. But each time, Fola returned safely, her bright smile making Tolu's heart burn with frustration. One day, Tolu asked one of the palace maids to give Fola a plate of fruit. "Make sure she eats it all," Tolu instructed the maid with a cold smile. "It will make her strong." The maid hesitated. She felt something wasn't right. On her way to give Tola the fruits, she stumbled and the plate fell to the ground, so instead of giving it to the girl, the maid quietly gave it to the fowls to eat. Few hours later, the fowls all died and the maid reported to the king what had happened. When Adeola heard this, he was furious. "How dare anyone try to harm my daughter?" he thundered. Tolu was clever though. She acted surprised and innocent when confronted. "Hi, king," she said, pretending to be shocked. "I would never harm Fola. I love her as my own child. There must be some mistake. I believe the fowls must have eaten something else that caused their death." But Adeola wasn't convinced. He kept a closer eye on Fola after that, making sure she was always safe. He even ordered his guards to keep watch over her without letting Fola know why. Tolu, seeing that her first attempt had failed, grew even more desperate. "I have to be careful," she told herself, "but I will not give up. That girl must go one way or another." As the days passed, Fola remained blissfully unaware of the danger surrounding her. She continued to live happily, playing in the palace gardens and spending time with her father. But Tolu's jealousy continued to grow like a poison, darkening her heart more with each failed plan. And so, the quiet battle for Adeola's affection went on, though only Tolu knew the depth of her bitterness. Frustrated by all her failed attempts to harm Fola, Queen Tolu grew desperate. She had tried everything, poisoning the young princess's food, sending her on dangerous errands and even attempting to make her ill. But every time, Fola escaped unharmed. Her luck infuriated the queen even more, as Adeola's love for his daughter seemed to grow with each passing day. "I need to get rid of her once and for all," Tolu whispered bitterly to herself one night. She was sitting alone in her chambers, plotting her next move. Suddenly, an idea came to her. This time, it had to be something drastic, something that would ensure Fola never returned. She knew of some men, dangerous men, who lived in the next village. Tolu decided she would hire them to kidnap the princess and make sure she was never found. The next day, Tolu sent a messenger to bring the men to her in secret. When they arrived, she met them in the dark not far from the palace. "I need you to take someone away from here now," Tolu said, her voice cold and firm. "Take her to a place far away and bury her alive. She must never return." The men looked at each other, their faces emotionless. "It will cost you," one of them said. "I will pay you whatever you want," she replied, her eyes flashing with determination. "Just get it done." Satisfied with her promise, the men agreed. "Consider it done, my queen," the leader said with a wicked smile. But what Tolu didn't know was that one of the palace maids, Abani, had overheard everything. Abani was returning from an errand and had seen the queen talking to the strange men. Her heart had raced with fear as she listened to their deadly plan. "I have to warn the king," Abani whispered to herself as she comes out of hiding several minutes after the queen and the men left. As Abani rushed into the palace, she found King Adeola in the royal hall, speaking with some of his advisors. Her face was pale and she was out of breath when she approached him. "Hi, king, please, I need to speak with you urgently," Abani cried, her voice trembling. Adeola frowned, noticing the fear in her eyes. "What is it, Abani? Speak," he said, motioning for her to come closer. Abani took a deep breath and told the king everything she had heard. "The queen, she has paid some men to kidnap Princess Fola and I overheard," Abani said, her voice shaking with horror. Adeola's face turned dark with anger. "What?" he roared, standing up from his throne. His heart pounded as he thought of his daughter in danger. Without wasting another second, Adeola called for his guards. "Gather every man you can. We must find the princess before it's too late," he ordered. The guards hurried out of the palace, following the king as he led the way. Abani stayed behind, praying silently that they would find Fola in time. Meanwhile, the men hired by Queen Tulu had already captured Fola to make their job easy. Queen Tulu told Fola to follow her out for a walk through the palace secret exit that led to the forest where the men were waiting in hiding. They quickly covered her mouth to stop her from screaming. They tied her hands and feet, carrying her into the dark forest that surrounded the village. Fola cried silently, struggling against the ropes. But the men ignored her. By the time Adeola and his guards reached the edge of the forest, the men were already digging a hole in the ground, preparing to bury the young princess. "Stop!" Adeola's voice boomed through the trees as he and his guards appeared. He drew his sword, his face full of fury. "Let her go!" The men froze, startled by the king's sudden appearance. But it was too late for them to run. The guards quickly surrounded them, overpowering them and tying them up before they could escape. Fola was lying on the ground near the hole. She sobbed, struggling to free herself from the ropes. Adeola rushed to her side, his heart filled with relief as he cut the ropes with his knife and pulling her into his arms. "You are safe now." As the guards took the kidnappers away, Adeola turned to one of his most trusted men. "Take these criminals to the palace cell," he ordered. "They will pay for their crimes." When Adeola returned to the palace with Fola, he knew there was one more person who needed to be dealt with: Queen Tulu. The sun shone brightly over Owo land as the village gathered in the large square. The air was thick with tension, for today was no ordinary day. King Adeola had called for a public confrontation, and the people whispered among themselves, wondering what had caused such a serious event. At the center of the square stood Queen Tulu, her face twisted with anger and pride. She glared at the crowd, feeling their judgmental stares. King Adeola approached, his face grim and his voice steady as he spoke to the entire village. "Queen Tulu," he began, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "why did you send men to kidnap my daughter?" he said angrily. Tulu faced the king with anger in her eyes. "Why?" she spat, her voice dripping with bitterness. "Because she is not your true heir. I should be the one to give you an heir. But you don't even care about that, all because of her." She pointed angrily toward the palace. "I should be the one to give you an heir," she shouted. "I made you king. I got rid of your parents so you could rule. Yes, I poisoned the late king and queen with the help of those men so you could marry me and make me your queen. The queen mother to the future king of our land. I wanted you all to myself, but no, you shower that your daughter of yours, Fola, with all the love." She paused and took a deep breath. "I worked so hard to be the perfect queen for you. I learned how to speak, how to walk, how to smile, and even how to laugh just right. But you ignored me. All that love and care you give to Fola, you should have given to me and my children." "Oh wait," she said bitterly. "I have none. And you didn't even notice." A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. The people began to murmur among themselves, stunned by Tulu's words. Adeola stared at her, shocked, his voice filled with disbelief. "I can't believe I've been living with my enemy. You murdered my parents for selfish reasons. You are truly evil," he said. Adeola took a step closer to her, his expression cold and stern. "You have committed an abomination, Tulu," he said in a low voice, his eyes filled with disappointment. "You killed the late king and queen of this land, and you plotted to kill an innocent child. You are no longer fit to be queen." Tulu's face contorted with rage. "You were never going to agree to marry me if you didn't become king, so I did what I had to," she screamed. "Yet you never loved me, you only cared about that girl. I wanted to give you a son, an heir to the throne, but you never gave me a chance." Tears of frustration filled her eyes, but they were not tears of regret. She felt no guilt for what she had done. Adeola shook his head slowly. "Love cannot come from evil," he said firmly. "You have let your jealousy and lustful ambition for power consume you, and now, you must pay for your wickedness." With a wave of his hand, the royal guard stepped forward. "Strip her of her title," the king ordered. "She will no longer be queen of Owo land." The guards obeyed, removing Tulu's crown and royal beads and attire as the people watched. leaving her in her brown inner wear and scarf, and Tolu's face grew pale as she realized the full weight of her punishment. The once proud queen was now nothing more than a disgraced woman. But Adeola was not finished. "Tolu," he continued, "for your wickedness and the atrocities you have committed," Adeola said, his voice filled with authority, "you and those evil men will be buried alive. For the gods demand justice for your crimes." At this, the people murmured in agreement. Death was the best punishment for traitors like them. Trembling, Tolu gasped, but her pride would not let her beg for mercy. She lifted her chin, glaring at the king. Adeola turned away, giving the final order. "Take her away." The men were taken to the outskirts of the village where they were buried. After a sacrifice was made to cleanse the palace, Tolu was taken to the forest at night, dressed as tradition demands. And she was buried alive as the elders whispered prayers to the gods, thankful that justice had been served. With Tolu gone and the men punished, peace returned to Owo land. King Adeola was a fair and kind ruler, dedicating his life to his people and his daughter. He never remarried, for no one could replace Bisola in his heart. Instead, he focused all his energy on raising Fola and leading his kingdom with wisdom. Fola grew into a beautiful young woman, admired by everyone in Owo land. She inherited her father's wisdom and her mother's kindness, and the people loved and respected her deeply. Years later, Fola married a nobleman from a neighboring village. The wedding was a grand celebration and the entire kingdom rejoiced. Her husband was a kind and honorable man, and together they brought joy to the people. Not long after their marriage, Fola gave birth to a son. The boy was named Adeola Jr. after his grandfather, and the kingdom celebrated. The future of Owo land was secure, and the people knew that under the leadership of King Adeola, Fola, and her new family, their land would continue to thrive in peace and prosperity for generations to come. This story reminds us that actions have consequences and true love cannot be forced through manipulation, just like Queen Tolu's desire for power and love caused her to commit terrible acts for her personal gain. But in the end, she found herself without the love and children she longed for, which led to her downfall. Evil acts will only lead to regret and bring punishments. Thank you for watching this amazing video. I hope you enjoyed watching as much as I enjoyed creating it. Please like, share, and comment on the lessons you have learned.